Diversity and inclusion officers are all the rage right now. And I think you often think about that in terms of race and gender, but maybe not so much in terms of disability. And disability is diversity.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question, why? We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Jen Tennican. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, producer, and director. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you for having me, Emmy.
Absolutely. Tell me what it means to be an award-winning documentary director and filmmaker.
I think you just need to take the award-winning part out of it. If you look hard enough, you can always find an award. It just means I don't know. It means I'm dedicated to telling stories and telling them well, hopefully. And I've focused, since I moved to Jackson in 2002, I've really focused on community stories. I don't think I've made a film that's farther than a 20-mile drive from my house. So I'm saving the world through sustainable local film production.
Okay,
You're welcome, Earth.
You're welcome, Earth, because you're not driving and
flying,
carbon monoxide and all those terrible things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. We appreciate that right here, right now.
You're welcome. There are plenty of stories to mine locally. I mean, and it's funny that my current project, which we've just finished production on and is now in its film festival run, Hearts of Glass, a vertical farm takes root in Wyoming, is about local sustainable food production. And that term locavore, right, applies to filmmaking, except I don't know what it would be for local filmmaking. But anyway, people who eat locally are called locavores, and people who make films locally are called filmmaker local somebody person.
Your new word. We're going to add that to the dictionary.
All of the listeners, please, I hope there are a lot of listeners to this podcast, please write in to Emmy and suggest new words for local filmmakers that are as catchy as locavore for people who eat local food.
No, I like that. That's very creative. Yeah. Tell me about your latest project.
So we covered the first 15 months of Vertical Harvest's operation, and Vertical Harvest is a social venture here in Jackson Hole. It grew out of a need for year-round food here. I think if you've listened to the previous podcast from Nona, who's one of the co-founders, you will realize that the ground in Jackson is frozen 8 months a year, so it's difficult to produce food here year-round. So there was this desire to have year-round food, and then out of that grew the idea of meaningful, competitively paid work for community members with disabilities. So we're hopefully taking people on this amazing journey of the first 15 months of this startup, and we are weaving stories of some of the employees with sort of the overall story of the business.
What was your desire to make this film? Why this one?
Why this film? Well, I didn't really want to make it if I'm being completely honest. I had just finished a previous film, which you know about, called Far Afield, A Conservation Love Story, about a conservation icon here in Jackson who's in his 90s and has had a tremendous impact on everyone from wildlife biologists to casual wildlife observers to whatever. And we had just finished that, and I realized that Vertical Harvest was about to get into their new 3-story high-tech hydroponic greenhouse. And I thought, I don't think anything like this is happening anywhere in the universe. Certainly, this kind of technology packed into a small footprint with the employment model. And it's a public-private partnership with the town of Jackson. I just thought, we have to do this. So I asked permission. I said, I'd really like to cover this. And they were game because I have such a stellar reputation. Yeah.
You
and
do.
away we went. And, we started filming, I think, in December of 2015. They weren't really up, growing, and running until the spring of 2016, but we didn't know when we'd actually start the story in our film. So we thought, it's really hard to fake people getting in the building for the first time. Could you just take all of that machinery out and put it back in for us? Just in case.
And they did, right?
No. Yeah,
No.
Yeah.
What is your passion about telling this story? Because I know you feel that it covers a lot of different social issues, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is the third long format documentary I've made, and they all seem to have a common thread, and that's community and who counts as community and what does community mean. And so in that respect, even though, my first one was about a bar and my second one was about a 90-year-old conservation icon, and the third one is about a high-tech hydroponic farm with a social mission of employment for community members with disabilities, they all have this through line, which is, basically nourishing community in a way. And it's a story of possibilities. So, I mean, now more than ever, personally for me, I need stories of possibilities. I need not inspiration porn, but inspiration can be good. And this really is a story of, community impact. It's about doing, the co-founders of Vertical Harvest did a tremendous amount of legwork and intellectual work and community building work to have this come to fruition. And, it's creative, it's outside the box thinking, it's risky because no one's done it before, but, you need to take risk to make progress. And, there's several, as you mentioned, several social components to it. So, the major social one is providing, good employment opportunities for community members who are typically underemployed or unemployed. And, that part of the film has been extremely eye-opening for me because we filmed over this 2-year period and then kind of got condensed in the film to 15 months. It meant establishing relationships with employees with and without disabilities, parents of employees with disabilities, service providers. And I guess I'm somewhat sad to say that many of my fellow community members with disabilities were not in my orbit, or maybe I wasn't paying attention. And that working on this project has certainly made me more aware of people with disabilities in my community. I hope it's made me feel less like us and them, because it's just sort of a range of diversity, right? And the more you think about just the human range of things, you get less tied up on who's on what end of the range.
And what were the lessons that you learned in working with people who have disabilities? That, one, you didn't see them in the community before you started really working with them. And is it...
before I started shoving my camera in their face? Is that what you mean by working? No, I'm just kidding.
Scaring them.
Right.
Following them, stalking them.
Right.
But what are the lessons that you learned, along the way that we can all learn from?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, that people tend to be more capable than one gives them credit for, right? And I think the other thing is that many of the accommodations made for people with disabilities actually benefit the entire population. So stop feeling like you're doing something wonderful for some needy part of the population and start feeling like you're just doing something to increase accessibility, make things better for everyone. So I have seen people grow in their jobs and their responsibilities. I think Vertical Harvest is very focused on empowering employees, both with and without disabilities, but there's a focus on self-advocacy and speaking up for oneself. What else has been surprising? The other thing that's kind of funny is, when I tell the story about getting involved with this, which is happening a lot because I'm doing press for the film and we're doing festivals, I say I wasn't really in the disability orbit before I started working on this. But the more I thought about it, I grew up with a brother who was diagnosed as manic depressive, lived with my parents for his whole life, never really kind of fledged but came back and struggled to find his place in the world. Particularly, I think, with employment was difficult, stressful. He didn't have a lot of support. And I think my parents were always conflicted with how hard to push. They could have used some outside help. You're a parent. It's hard. So at some point I thought, it's not quite the same, but it's not that different, right? Trying to find your place in the world, seeing that struggle, watching people look at him differently, askance, feeling like he was being judged because he didn't fit into some kind of narrow norm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I realized I really was in the disability orbit, and it's a club we can join at any point in our lives, for sure, having a disability.
Right. And just making everything more accessible to people with disabilities, I think, is one of the challenges that we all face if we don't think we have a family member or someone that is actually affected with a disability, then we probably don't realize how much inaccessibility there is that we all need to work on.
Well, right. And I would also argue you're probably not looking closely enough at your family. I'm sure there's someone with a disability somewhere. So,
that's really true, too.
Yeah. And as I said, I think some of these accommodations, so we were just out for our world premiere at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in Northern California, and it's an environmental film festival. It's about activism, and I'm sure they were drawn primarily to the film for its focus on sustainable local food production. But they worked with us. They supported us in having a second screening with open captions, and open captions means they're up the whole time. It's the equivalent of subtitles on a foreign film, but it was an English language film. And they also allowed us to have a panel discussion afterwards where we were able to recruit an executive director of a disability service provider in the area who was local to be the moderator. The festival also generously underwrote an ASL interpreter for that to just make it even more accessible. And it really makes a difference. And I think the environmental movement, and we've gotten in 3 environmental film festivals so far, in addition to others that are sort of general film festivals and a very well-regarded disability-focused film festival. But it is interesting that we're appealing to the conservation environmental movement. And I think they are trying to make a move towards diversity and inclusion. And I think what you run into sometimes is, diversity and inclusion officers are all the rage right now. And I think you often think about that in terms of race and gender, but maybe not so much in terms of disability. And disability is diversity.
That is really true. And you're right. The conversation doesn't really go there, does it?
I mean, I think it's going there more. But, again, when I was out at the film festival and watching a number of, the films that are very advocacy oriented and some are more sort of outdoor sports enjoyment, they do have this perspective. It's sort of a bias of enjoying the outdoors from a perspective of not having a disability. Unless there's a person with a disability doing something amazing, like the top, 0.00001% of people with, like the one who climbs Everest, or, it would be nice to just, have a cool little documentary about someone using a wheelchair accessible trail, or, it could be just a little quiet, cool process. I don't know. I just...
Did your film stand out among those because there wasn't any other films that were showing this kind of connection between the environment and people with disabilities?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't want to, I didn't watch every film, and I didn't memorize the screening list, so there may indeed have been a film. Well, there were actually films that touched on it. There was a film about, it was called Ghost Fleet, and it was about fishermen who had been kidnapped and sort of sold into slavery, and a number of them had acquired disabilities throughout their enslavement, right? They'd lost arms and limbs and were blind, things had happened over the course of it. But yeah, I think we were in the minority in terms of bringing disability issues into the film festival. But the other cool thing about it is because it was our world premiere, we kind of went there in force, and we had a very inclusive group representing for the film. So, we did press together, we did a podcast together, we walked the green carpet, because at environmental film festivals, you do not have red carpets, you have green carpets.
Perfect.
Perfect. We all participated in the panel discussion after the second screening. And it was also a lesson for me, because I think we often want to jump in and speak for people with disabilities. And it was good to just let people answer questions as they understood them, as they wanted to answer them, and not always be, women, we jump in, we want to be the mom. We got to dial it back.
So here's my last question, but the most important one.
Oh, geez.
How does the Wyoming Humanities help organizations like yours to enrich our state community?
The Humanities Council has been a supporter of a number of my projects, and I am so grateful to have them on Hearts of Glass, particularly, I think, because they get it. They get that there's not a lot of content like this being produced, and these are really important topics. They're timely, they're multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. There are a lot of interlinked themes in this film. I mean, you've got social entrepreneurship, you have sustainable local food production, you have innovation, you have disability advocacy and employment, and you have an opportunity to increase the body of work that's done that has nuanced portraits of community members with disabilities. So often, I think, you don't see people with disabilities in the media, although, it's changed and I think getting better in some ways. Or they're very limited portrayals. They're sort of stereotypical portrayals or two-dimensional portrayals, monolithic. One person with a disability stands in for everyone. They're people to be pitied because it's a documentary. And I think because we are true to life and we captured people both at their work at the greenhouse, but also outside the greenhouse and in their community, that you get a real sense of who these people are. I shouldn't have said these people, but who the characters in the film are. And we chose to focus on 5 characters with disabilities who are employees of Vertical Harvest. So,
well, you're doing such great work, and the Wyoming Humanities is glad that you're a grantee. Excellent.
Well, we appreciate it. And our next step, or some of our next steps, are to take the film out to the rest of Wyoming. And so we're excited to do that and hopefully create some of these partnerships and collaborations that are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary with, not only the arts and humanities, but the ag programs and the business programs. I mean, the social sciences, there's a lot of, just about everything's humanities, Do you know that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why, a production of Think Why, Wyoming Humanities. This has been executive producer Emmy DeGrappa. Please subscribe and never miss a show. For more information, go to thinkwhy.org.